Okay. All right. So we're going to go with that. The Canadian icon that is Pat Reid. He's been involved as a coach, administrator, promoter within female sport for women's hockey. He's been involved in athletics all across the country. Pat, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Thanks for inviting me to Stark Studios, David.
Yeah, Stark Studios, also known as where Stark sleeps at night. So tell the listeners a bit about who you are as Pat Reid.
Well, I'm somebody who's been involved in sport all my life. I guess I got started in Aklavik, Northwest Territories. My dad was in the RCMP. I was born in Edmonton, spent 3 days there, and then spent my first few years in Aklavik, the Northwest Territories. Then moved to Elliott Lake and went through public school and high school, got involved in sports, started coaching fastball. We won a Northern Ontario championship, and then I moved on to University of Waterloo for an undergraduate degree, Western for a master's, and then worked in the industry for 40 years before I decided to go back to school at the University of Alberta and pick up a PhD so I could keep on with the teaching.
Yeah, so yeah, I think, the fact that you just skimmed over that pretty illustrious career is it's funny because you're a very humble individual, and I really appreciate that about you. But you're seen as basically a pioneer within female hockey in Canada and female hockey in general, women's hockey especially. What do you think about the current state of women's hockey now? Let's just dive right into it.
Well, I think women's hockey, I mean, it's a male-dominated sport. I mean, that's why we had trouble getting the first World Championship off the ground in 1990. Because the men just didn't believe in it, didn't support it. It was a real issue. We had to do some crazy things to make it successful. And it's kind of been that way forever with women's hockey. And I think currently there were 2 leagues. One league's folded. It's got to do with salaries and full-time employment for the women, who certainly deserve it. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago at Primetime Sports Conference in Toronto to ask Gary Bettman if the NHL would step in like the NBA did with the WNBA, and would the NHL support women's professional hockey. And his answer was, the time is just not right now. And that was the official answer. And off stage, off camera, further discussions went on with some of us in hockey, with hockey interests. And the story was that really the other league had to fold, and they had to start over with just one league. And I think then the NHL would very definitely be interested in getting involved. And I think that's the only way it's going to survive. If I had the money and I had the time, and I think the way women's hockey, the only way it's going to survive, what we heard at that conference is that it had to start from the grassroots up. You had to get more women playing hockey. You had to get more people as spectators in arenas, and then you'd attract more sponsors, and slowly it would. And I think BS, none of that'll work. I think what has to happen is somebody with money, an entrepreneur, has to come in, and they have to create a women's World Cup. The men's World Cup is canceled in 2022. Okay. Should be replaced with the Women's World Cup. Oh. And if you have an international event like that, you would attract sponsors, you'd attract a network, and you have to do it from the top down with something big, because you're not going to get spectators coming out to follow pro women's hockey in a bunch of arenas. It's a very similar situation to Canada's first national team for men, which is coached by Dave King from Calgary. They couldn't make a go of it running around all the NHL rinks. They had to go to all these smaller communities in Northern Ontario, and they had to play the Russians. And I think it's the same thing with women's hockey. You got to start from the top down with a really big event.
Some insightful information. So any entrepreneurs out there who got some big plans for 2022 and a lot of money. So you were the director of operations for the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association when Canada won its first ever back-to-back gold medals at the World Junior Ice Hockey Championships and its first gold medal at the inaugural IIHF Women and World Ice Hockey Championships in 1991. Tell us what that experience was like going through. This is the first time for it, and here we are 20 years later, 30 years later for that matter almost. What was it like?
Well, it was a lot harder to win back then. The Soviet Union was one country, It hadn't broken up into all these little individual units now. It was one country and very powerful. Same thing with Czechoslovakia. It hadn't divided into Slovakia and Republic of Czech. It was one country. And guys like Pavel Bure and Jaromir Jagr on those teams, pretty good names. And
mediocre.
And we had a pretty good team. We had Eric Lindros on both of those teams, probably the biggest name that people might remember. Felix Potvin, Patrice Brisebois, Chris Draper. I mean, all of the players are first-round draft picks. There's a couple of funny stories people might be interested in. One of them is selecting the players for those teams. I was what they call the director of operations or general manager, and we had really good coaches, Dick Todd, Perry Pern, Guy Charon. And anyway, you have these players. They're all at summer camp. They're all first-round draft picks. They're all millionaires. And you have to tell somebody, guess what, even though you're the top scorer on your team and you're the captain, well, you're going to be on the fourth line. And
not an easy thing to do.
Not an easy thing to do. And some players took it really hard. So there were three reactions. We'd call them into, well, the head coach wanted to do it alone. So the head coach, I remember Guy Charon, we're doing it at 5 o'clock in the morning because some players did not want to be embarrassed, find out they were being cut, in fact, and you're not on the team, not even the fourth line,
right?
And would affect their ranking. So he wanted these conversations to happen at 5 in the morning so the players could slide out of there before the media got a hold of them. So some players would come in and they'd be told they hadn't made the team. They'd actually break down and start crying and say, I can't leave this room. I can't go out there. Media might be there. And it was very sad. There are other players that said, would be very angry, and they'd say, this is bullshit. I should be on this team. And I'm going to go back to junior and I'm going to show you, you really made a mistake. And they'd leave and slam the door. And the third group, the guy would say, what? I'm cut? Dive over the table, grab Guy by the throat and start pounding him. And so he said, guys, these juniors are big. So no more doing this alone. You've got to sit on the other side of the table with me. We need 3 or 4 people there just to discourage people from...
Yeah, bodyguards.
From bodyguards. So anyway, we won back-to-back in 1991, the first time any country ever won back-to-back. And an interesting statistic, the winning goal scored in 1990 was by Dwayne Norris from Newfoundland. And in 1991, the winning goal was scored by John Slaney, also from Newfoundland.
No way.
And it was first time any country had ever won back-to-back world championships. First one was in Helsinki, Finland. The second one was in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And then shortly right after that, well, the next year, I left the program at that point. The next year, unfortunately, they placed, 6th or 8th. But then the Soviet Union exploded and Czechoslovakia divided, and now it was really, they were the toughest teams to play against. And with them gone, it's really our tournament to lose. Surprising we do lose, but...
yeah, more frequently than not now, especially. It's been a tough tournament to win. And how... So, despite the fact that it's become equal now and, there are other countries that are playing at a very high level, not just Canada, what are your thoughts on how it's become more commercialized and the World Juniors are this, time around the Christmas holidays that people spend watching ice hockey and at the junior level?
Well, it was really the only time you could make it work. All of these players are drafted into the NHL. They're just finishing their major junior careers, and there really wasn't any other time that they had a natural break in the program. So they decided to put it on during Christmas and New Year's. It's always tradition. The first game is always on Boxing Day, and the final game is somewhere around January 7th. And then they're right back into their junior leagues. So it's really the only time you could fit it in. And unfortunately, TSN picked up this event and the women's event years ago, and they own those properties. And it fits quite nicely as a sport event because all the other major leagues basically are shut down except for the bowl games in college football. But it's a little niche that they've created, and they've got a tremendous following. Yeah,
it's impressive, and it's very cool that you were a part of that, the beginning of it especially. So that's not the only thing, hockey's one sector of the many things that you've been involved with over the past 40 years that you called your industry career. Your athletes won 16 national titles, including 7 straight national junior titles, and represented Canada in 4 Olympic Games. How did you become such a high-level coach, getting these athletes to perform at the highest level on this planet?
Well, I was lucky. My preparation was a kinesiology degree from the University of Waterloo, and I studied biomechanics and exercise physiology and anatomy, and kind of out of all those different subjects, I was able to piece together a coaching program. And I actually contacted our national, it's an interesting start, quite bizarre actually. I contacted our national high jump coach. I was a high jump specialist. And he lived in BC. His name was Lionel Pugh. He coached a woman named Debbie Brill, who's a Canadian record holder. And I said, look, I got a girl from Elliott Lake here who's pretty good. And I'm a beginning coach. We'd like to come out and work with you for a couple of weeks and learn more about high jumping. And his response was, send the girl, stay home. So that's kind of the way.
Did he give you any reason?
Well, he thought of himself as the top coach in the country, and he wasn't interested in working with other coaches.
Program?
Not at all. So I thought, well, that's not going to work. So I got a hold of a jumper in the U.S. named Dwight Stones. He had just broken the world record twice. He was at Long Beach State, and I phoned him, and I said, listen, I'm a up-and-coming coach, and I have this pretty good athlete who's preparing for the Canada Games, which she ended up winning. And I said, could we come down and work with you? And he said, you want to come down and work with me? Absolutely. Come down. I'll get you a couple of rooms, a couple of dorm rooms, and you can work with me. How long do you want to stay? And we ended up for 10 days. And
wow.
So he walked me into the bar, and he ran beside me into the bar as if I was the jumper, and talking the whole time. And I recorded everything he said, and I taped everything, all the mechanics that he did. And that was the start. And then I realized, well, you might as well learn from the best. So after Dwight, I spent a few months putting together my program. And then I guess my next trip, this athlete and I went to Hungary, and we trained with Andrea Mate, who was the indoor world record holder, and her coach, Paul Eros. And then the next summer we went to Italy and trained with the Olympic gold medalist Sarah Simeoni and her coach, Zara Arminio. And we just ended up going to a lot of countries. I went to Germany and trained with Ulrike Mayfarth, who won 2 Olympic gold medals, and Dietmar Mogenberg, who was a world record holder, and Carlo Trainart. We trained with them at their national training center in Cologne. And by that time, I kind of had it all figured out. And so I put together my program and came back, and I was kind of stuck. I was in Ottawa, and there are 2 universities there. Carleton University does not have a phys ed program, and the University of Ottawa did not have a track team. So I could only work with kids that were in Ottawa who were in high school. So it was tough to find athletes and get them to a high enough level. But Bridget Bittner won the junior nationals 4 times, and 3 times. Joanne McLeod won it 3 times, and Kathy Margerison won it once. So that's how we got that string of 7. And Brian Marshall ended up going to the Olympic Games, and Milt Audie and Bridget, and yeah, there were a number of them. They did extremely well.
It's impressive the fact that you can just rattle off these names, no problem. I struggle remembering my name sometimes. So you've gone to all these Olympic Games. You've been all across the world. What is it like to be at the Olympic Games? Basically the tip top of athletic performance.
It's an honor to be there because you're with the best athletes in the world. Some of them that shouldn't be there. We know all about the drug programs that existed.
Yeah.
But,
so hold on. Let's get into that. What do you think of this Russian ban?
They should have been out a long time ago. You know what? I'll tell you right now. I will predict they are not out. We've heard that they're out.
Okay.
It's kind of like smoke and mirrors. Yes, they've been caught. Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. A state drug program that their athletes have to be on drugs to be on the national team. But you wait and see. The politics will now kick in, and Russia's a very powerful country, so they'll go to the Center for Arbitration in Sport, CAS, internationally, and the Russians have their fingers in there, and you'll find that the IOC, I bet, will say, you know what, we don't have a charter to kick a country out of the Olympic Games, so we're going to let them back in. And then they'll come up with some excuse of, well, I think they've already started by saying Rodchenkov, he's the whistleblower. There were 3 of them working in the lab. And I won't go into all the details, but Rodchenkov was the guy. The other 2 guys were after the Olympics in Russia. The other 2 guys were mysteriously killed. And Rodchenkov realized, hey, there's only 3 of us that know about this program, and the other 2 are gone.
Yeah.
So he beat it. He got in a plane and ended up in the U.S. and said, hey, I need to be in the witness protection program. I'll tell you the whole story. And he explained it all, and it was confirmed through a couple of commissions.
Okay.
The McLaren report, McLaren Commission, and the IOC then punished Russia, or tried to, but they slid out from that and got to compete in Rio under a neutral flag and so on. And I think the same thing's going to happen. You're going to find that a number of these athletes are still going to somehow manage to show up and compete in Tokyo, but
whether or not they've got that Russian flag above or not.
Yeah, they shouldn't be there at all. I mean, they should not be there, but the politics of sport, I'm predicting you'll see there will be Russians there, although right now everybody's saying there's no way.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're telling that story from a first-hand point of view, and it's in the movie. Is it Invictus that movie details?
Yeah,
goes through into detail. So if those are interested, Pat just basically explained some of the story of Invictus there. So if you want to see it yourself, the 1984 Olympics, the one because of that, with that protest, what was that like? How was it different than the others?
Well, we've had problems in every Olympic Games. When we I guess I started in '72 at Munich as a first-year student at university, and that's where the Black September group broke into the Israeli village and ended up killing those coaches and athletes. That kind of was the start of trouble on the Olympic stage. And then in '76 we had apartheid in South Africa, so a whole bunch of countries boycotted because of the apartheid situation. 1980, because the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the Americans tried to encourage all countries to not go to the Moscow Olympics and give them the platform that they were looking for.
Yeah.
And so Canada, unfortunately, Joe Clark, 2 bonehead moves he made. He was our prime minister for a few weeks. He's the guy who called the boycott and ruined the dreams of a lot of kids, which had no effect on Russia.
Yeah, Chris Critelli, one of our previous guests, wasn't able to compete at that Olympics. I mean, they didn't qualify, but their team found out previously, right before their final game, to qualify, and they ended up losing. But that was their opportunity, and dreams crushed, right?
Oh, it was terrible. So to get even, the Eastern Bloc refused to go to LA in '84 and let the Americans have the big show they wanted. So anyway, I was one of 2 head coaches. I was the field event head coach, and the other head coach was a guy named Charlie Francis, who that guy's a little more well known in the industry than I am. And that was a pretty good games, though. We called it best ever because we won more medals there, but of course half the world wasn't there. But we did very well. L.A. is quite the place. But the pollution existed back then. We got calls in the morning saying, don't let the distance runners go out running before noon because there was so much acid rain in the air in that little valley in L.A. Wow. And that whole thing about climate change, it was bad back then, and that was 1984.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see in 2028 what those Olympics look like, a couple years later. Half a century almost, for that matter. So I know you have a couple stories about being at the Olympics, running through airports, driving up on sidewalks with particular runners. Do you want to get into details on that story?
Well, I think you're talking about 1988. Ben Johnson was running in Seoul, and Brian Marshall, my high jumper, was competing on the same day. The qualifying round is when the heats were on in the 100 meters, and his high jump final was the same day as Ben Johnson's 100-meter run. I was the head coach of the World Junior team, so I couldn't stay at the Seoul Olympics. I didn't have any more holidays left, so I was only there for 3 days. Flew over to watch Ben run and Brian jump. And then the next day, shopped like crazy because it was Korea. And I came back with 19 shirts and 3 suitcases and 2 pairs of shoes and a raincoat. And that's quite the probably the place to shop. Anyway, then I was flying home, and I was on a plane, and 17 hours from Seoul to New York, and a couple hours into the flight, this kid comes down the aisle, and he said, "Dad, I got Ben Johnson's autograph. He's up in first class." And I thought, what? So I got up and I went up.
How could he be sitting in first class and I'm back here?
No, what happened is in the morning I went to the airport early to get head back, and to check in, and everybody surrounded me because here I am in a Canada sweatsuit, and they went, "Are you Charlie Francis?" And I went, "No, I'm not Charlie Francis." And where's Ben Johnson? I have no idea where Ben Johnson is, but everybody knew he was trying to get out of Dodge as fast as he could. So all the media bought tickets and got on the first flight out. And when the doors were closing and they realized Ben wasn't going to get on the plane, they all jumped off, cashed their tickets in, bought tickets on the next flight. And this went on for about 5 flights. And then the one to New York, which is a direct flight, same thing happened. And when they saw the doors closing, they all got off and the doors closed. But what happened is we went out on the runway. I certainly didn't notice, but we stopped as we were taxiing, and then we took off. And so I went up and I said, "Ben, how did you get on this airplane?" I knew him well, obviously, because we traveled for years together. Charlie always kept his people in one hotel, and I was with the field event people in another hotel. We saw Ben getting bigger and bigger, but he kept getting drug tested. But it wasn't until years later that we found out that he was on stanazolol, which was a drug that they had no test for. So Robert Dugal created the test. He was a guy from the Montreal lab, Canadian, and he showed up in Seoul with the stanazolol test, and they caught Ben. But anyway, we're on the airplane, and he said, well, they're afraid they'd wreck the airport. So what they did is they, as the plane got out, started to taxi, they stopped and they put the stairs out, and Ben got on with his mother and his sister and the badass doctor, Jamie Astafan, and his wife, and all his luggage. So they brought the stairs out, they got on the plane, took the stairs away, and away they went. So when we got to New York, Ben said, "Would you help me with my luggage and stuff?" Because we had to bring all our luggage right onto the plane. Well, his mother's a big woman. And so I said, "Sure, I'll help you." So there I am carrying his bags and helping his mom, and here we are on world television. And my dad's at home watching TV like everybody else, going, "What the hell's my son got himself into now?" Because I had the Canadian uniform on, which the World Junior uniform was the same as the Olympic uniform. Anyway, we got out, and Astafan's brother had a car, and I said to Ben, "You stay here. I'll get your mom and your sister in the back seat, get all the luggage in the trunk. I'll schlep all this stuff out, and then you come out at about 4 or 5 minutes later, and you just run. I'll have the door open. You jump in the car, and we'll head from LaGuardia to Kennedy, and then you can fly up to Toronto." And that's what we did. And the media were so rambunctious. There were so many of them. They tore the doors right off the front of the airport, broke the glass windows, trying to get at Ben and trying to get the story.
Holy shit.
And we ran out, got in this car, and we raced down the road exiting the airport, and Astafan hit the curb, and the car jumped up on the grass. I thought he was going to roll a bloody car. Yelling at him to slow down.
Yeah, and that's okay. You can swear on here.
Slow the fuck down.
There we go.
And I thought could have gotten killed. And anyway, we got back down on the road, and there we are driving. We're driving, and all these yellow cabs chasing us all the way to the airport. So when we got to the other airport, Ben had a flight to Toronto, but we had a few hours to kill, and so the media were everywhere. So I took him into the Air Canada Lounge, and all the media bought tickets to be members of Air Canada Lounge, and they came in. So then I had to move them to American Airlines. Then I had to move them to United Airlines. I just kept moving them around the airport, trying to keep the people away from them, because there was just a mob scene. I mean, it was quite an incident unfortunately, when Ben got caught. They didn't catch the other guys in that race. I think Ben was
one of many.
In some respects targeted.
Really?
You know, the head of. No, there's some of it can't be proven, but the head of doping at the time was an East German, and he was quoted as saying there were 100 positive drug tests in Rome at the track and field world championships in '87, and the Olympics were in '88, and they said the sport was out of control. We had to do something. And here was a guy who was one of the best in the world, but he was black, had a speech impediment, and he was from a country we knew wouldn't support him, wouldn't defend him. And Ben gets caught, and we go through the Dublin inquiry and all this hand-wringing. And I was at Sport Canada at the time, and the minister was pissed that this happened and blamed Sport Canada, and that started the downfall of the government structure for high performance. And they set up these other systems with groups like Own the Podium and Road to Excellence being third-party groups, so that if the shit hit the fan again, it wouldn't reflect on the minister and the government. It'd be these third parties. That's the way the government works.
Wow. Wow. Crazy. So you were Ben Johnson's entourage for a couple days there.
Well, and, Ben got persecuted. He was left by his own. Very few people know that when he came to Canada from Jamaica with his family, his dad was a beekeeper and raised bees in Jamaica. And when he came to Canada the first winter, he almost died of pneumonia. He couldn't handle the Canadian winters at all. So every winter, he went back to Jamaica and raised his bees. And Ben's mother cleaned houses and basically was a breadwinner. So when Ben started running and making money, it was very easy to see that he could be manipulated into being the fundraiser for the family. But when the Dublin inquiry happened and everybody vacated Ben, his dad came back and spent that winter with him. And got pneumonia and died. So that was a pretty tough time. That was a pretty tough time for Ben and those of us who knew the sacrifice. Anyway, then we ended up with a doping program, and then Ben, he had one break, I guess. Very few people know this, but Gaddafi came to him and said, everybody knows you're an amazing runner. I'd like you to come and train our soccer team. And they gave him $300,000. Well, they gave him a lot of money for a month to train that soccer team. And Ben came to Ottawa, and I wrote up his CV for him and just some background stuff. And he sent all this stuff over, and he quietly went over there and coached their team for a month.
Wow.
And then he got talked into some really stupid promotional things about cheetahs, and he raced a horse in PEI for money, just for the hell of it, because he had such a fast start.
Yeah.
But he's still in Toronto, and I still think there's a story to be told there. I'm working on an academic paper on the whole drug scene from the 80s. It all started in 1983 when we had two weightlifters caught at the Pan American Games in Caracas, Venezuela. And anyway, I'm working with a real expert, Dr. Ian Ritchie at Brock, and hopefully we're going to put together a really good paper on all that stuff.
I'm very excited to hear that, and thank you for sharing that. I heard that in passing one time, that story, and the fact that it's the amount of emotion that you clearly showed, and it takes my breath away. And Jordan's sitting here beside me, shaking his head as well. These are things that you don't get to hear, and it's amazing that you have all of this knowledge and you're willing to share it, and I appreciate it. And so we'll move to a slightly happier subject, and we'll talk about. So you've been, I'm not putting that one down. That's a good one. So you've basically done everything within Canadian sport, whether it's being a coach, whether it's working the Olympic Games, chauffeuring guys around the country, avoiding media. How have you been able to balance going through all of these different jobs? You've gone starting in the Olympics, you've got World Juniors, you've got females hockey. How have you balanced that?
That's a good question. I think I've always worked at jobs that I wanted to do, and when they got boring, I just moved on. And I was at Sport Canada for 17 years, and there's some. What I did, it's probably more interesting to talk about some of the crazy stories, some of the things that happened that really aren't in print yet. But
let's do it.
But I just moved from job to job, and but some of the ones that were interesting I'll stick with hockey for a quick minute. Some people may have seen the television series Chernobyl. Mm-hmm. And I was actually in Moscow when Chernobyl blew up. It was just a fluke. I was there at the World Hockey Championships, and when that nuclear reactor blew up, fortunately it went left to right, the radiation. It didn't go south. But that was really crazy, and it polluted the area, and it's going to be like thousands of years before that's ever cleaned up. But the Russians, being the Russians, they held a hockey tournament there about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago now. And Canada took part, which I didn't think they should have. And but they were told to bring their own food and water. And they held this hockey tournament in Chernobyl, and I'm sure the Russians used that just as propaganda to tell people, look, the Canadians are here, the Americans here. There's no problem. Like, you can go back to your homes, and you don't have to worry about the radiation. And
bring up the nice kids from the north, and they'll be good, right?
Yeah, and they'll all be fine. Like, I grew up in Elliott Lake. It was uranium capital of the world at one time, and radiation is everywhere with uranium. And my 3 brothers and sister all had cancer. 2 of them died, and my sister and my one other brother are still alive but disabled from radiation. It creates cancer really bad, but you can't see it, smell it, or taste it. So dying to make a living, I think, was the story there. But if you saw that television series, and I'm sure it's still available on Netflix, it's very, very true. And anyway, that's one thing. On a happier note, I worked at Corel Corporation, and I was in charge of their international sports worldwide. One of the things we did is we sponsored the World Tennis Association Tour, 60 events in 23 countries, including the 4 Grand Slams. The unfortunate thing is I don't particularly like tennis, but I had to sit through the Grand Slams, went to Wimbledon, went to the U.S. Open, went to the Australian Open, went to the French Open. Sat with Mark McCormick, who looks after most of the top tennis players. Anyway, I was asked to be the sponsor of the World Tennis Championships in Madison Square Gardens in New York. And as the sponsor, we had to come up with really nice gifts for the players, Steffi Graf and Monica Seles and all these people. And we had these really nice crystal trophies. But when we got to New York, I thought, when I brought the trophies out and we showed the women before the tournament started, this is the World Championship, they kind of went, yeah, okay. And I thought, of course, they go to 60 events a year. They probably got more of this crap at home. Yeah. They don't need another piece of glass or crystal to put on whatever in a box. So I went down on Fifth Avenue, and I thought, I'm going to try and see if I can't find a sponsor to get something a little bit better. So I went into Versace store. Okay. Had to ring this bell, and they opened the door and let you in like you're some kind of criminal. And I said, we're here, we're the sponsor. I had no program. I had no marketing plan. I just was talking. So I went in and I said, we're pavement. We're the sponsor of the World Tennis Championships being held in Madison Square Gardens. It's going to be national televised on ABC television. And we have the top tennis players from around the world. And I said, is there any chance you would be interested in donating 3 jackets, one for the individual winner and one for each of the doubles winners? And the woman looked at me like, who the hell are you and what are you talking about? But she said, just a minute. And she went over to an intercom and said something. And about 2 minutes later, this door opened on the wall. And this woman came out. I found out, she told me her name was Donatella Versace. She just happened to be in New York at the time. And so I explained it all to her. And she said, I like that. She said, yeah, I think we would be interested. And I said, I see your jackets. They have their plastic bag that they're in has these giant letters Versace. I said, they'll be seen right on television. I'd carry that out and it would be held up in front of the cameras, and then we'd take the jacket out and put it on the individual winner and the 2 doubles winners, and it'd be the best prize they've ever won. So she said, how will we know they're going to fit? And I said, well, we'll take the 2 finalists in singles and the 2 pairs in doubles down the night before, and you can size them up for jackets. and then we won't miss the next day.
Holy
So
crap.
she said, okay. So I just remember the buttons had diamond chips in them. Each jacket was $7,000 US. So she donated 3 of them, and
That's the best $21,000 they've ever spent.
yeah,
By
and
far, I can guarantee as far as sponsorship, I'm sure. And all it took was one guy just knocking on their door. Hey,
well, it was a fluke, but it worked, and Steffi was pretty happy, as was Vicario and her partner. They're real partners. I think they were living together at the time. Anyway, they won the doubles, and Steffi won the singles as world champion. It's pretty cool.
Pat, these are incredible stories. I think my jaw's been on the ground for the past 25 minutes. Jordan's nodding in agreement as well. So how do you take these life-changing, because each of these are just, for one person it would make an imprint on their life for the rest of their life, and now you've got just left, right, and center these things are happening. I think you mentioned there it was a fluke, but I think luck happens, in right time in the right place. So I think you've been able to put yourself in the right place for that matter. And so what's this next story about? Previously before we went live, you were talking about you're heading into a park.
Yeah, it was the '96 Olympics in Atlanta, and I was with Corral Corporation, and we were one of the sponsors of the Olympic Games. And I had walked through this park on my way to the residence. That was about midnight, and it was late anyway. I was coming from the gymnastics event, and I walked through that park and got in my room, and with my wife, and at the time, and we heard these. I thought it was gunshots. It was there was an explosion, and then there was people screaming, and I thought for sure there'd been a rifleman somewhere, and so I just said, stay away from the windows. And we could hear the ambulances, and it was only later we found out that 100 people were taken to hospital, and one person died from the shrapnel, and one other person had a heart attack. But the guy who was the security guard, he had some mental problems. He was the guy who saw the bag and said, I think it shouldn't be there, so I'm concerned there may be a bomb. So he told everybody to get back, and and as he's shepherding everybody away, this thing goes off, and it injured 100 people and killed this one person, as I said. Well, it was the Olympic Games, and the U.S. Secret Service and FBI wanted to nail somebody quickly. And so they blamed him. And this is a movie you're going to see in the next month on TV or at the theaters. It's by Clint Eastwood. I forget the guy's name, but the name of the movie is his name.
Holy.
And what they do is they blame him. They talk him into admitting that he never admits it because he didn't do it. But they said, tell us on the phone, say, there's a bomb in this park and it's going to go off in 30 minutes. And they made him say it over and over and over on the phone. Well, then they used that against him and said, we got this recording. This guy's admitted.
Oh my gosh.
I think his name was Fennel. And so anyway, he gets charged and he gets put in prison. And a couple of years later, a bomb goes off in an anti-abortion clinic. And when they investigate it, they find out it's a pipe bomb, and it's identical to the one that went off in the park in Atlanta. So they realized they didn't have the right bomber in jail. They had this other guy was who they caught, and he admitted, yeah, I'm the one that had the bomb in Atlanta. So this guy went through all of this anguish and prison sentencing, and not long after he got out of prison, he ended up dying. So
oh my God.
Clint Eastwood seems to look at these scenarios, and he's done a movie on it. So you'll see that sometime in the next month. Richard Jewell, that's
Richard
it.
Jewell. So that'll be coming out when's it due to release?
It says 2019, so I'm assuming.
Oh, so in the next...
In December, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so look out for Richard Jewell there. So that was what, a 5-minute span between you missing that bomb as well?
Yeah, well, I'd walked right through the middle of that park, and into the my hotel was the media hotel, which is on the edge of that park. It was across the street from that park.
So you're just dodging bullets left, right, and center, literally and figuratively.
Well, it was it was at the right place or the wrong place at the right time or the wrong time. But yeah, it didn't affect me. But
so they take this individual who was doing this good deed and trying to have people shepherd them away, and then due to the fact that he may not have, or he, like you mentioned, he's got some maybe possibly mental disability there, and you've got now a situation where they're trying to drag him through the mud.
Yeah, shame. They made it sound like he was responsible, but he obviously wasn't. But yeah, it was terrible.
Well, I'm looking forward to watching that movie as well, because now I've got the actual point of view from someone who was physically there.
Well, I'm not sure how they're going to change it. I mean, I was in Munich in '72, and Steven Spielberg did that movie Munich, and that wasn't quite right, because he says that they ended up capturing the 3 terrorists that got away. And they were killed, but that's not true. 2 of them were killed, and the other guy had plastic surgery, and he's lived his life in Brazil, and that's another paper that I'm doing, because I have a scrapbook on Munich. I kept all the German newspapers at the time, just because I was interested in research way back then, and I'm now getting these, now that I'm into research sort of at Brock. I'm doing a paper on that whole Munich fiasco. I'm getting these newspapers translated because they're all in German, and you can't get them by microfiche. They don't exist anymore, so I have the only copies of these papers. So I spent last week talking to a couple of the guys who were at Sport Canada. They were there in Munich. I was there too, but I wasn't part of the entourage competing. But they were coming home. As it happened, the PLO, they were called Black September at that time. The Black September people jumped the fence in the morning, and it just so happened that some of the Canadians were coming in at the same time, because that was 1972, and the Canada-Russia famous hockey summit series was on, and the games were on in Montreal. So the Austrian athletes, they had an Austrian house set up for their athletes. So they invited the Canadians to come over there and watch the first game between Canada and Russia. And when the game ended, it was really late at night, so they were going back to the village. And they went into the village. At the same time, the Black September guys were coming over the fence. In fact, we have a water polo coach who I'm interviewing actually over the holidays, who helped them carry their bags, not knowing who the hell they were. And he was interviewed at the time of the Munich film, but anyway, he's was our national water polo coach. He lives in Hamilton now, looking after his parents. So, and he's a good friend. First name's David too. So I'm interviewing him over the Christmas holidays about that story. But
so I'm going to be honest with you. I feel so ill prepared for this interview because you have thrown out more information in these past 45 minutes than I could have ever imagined.
Well, there's one last story. And again, I don't know how these things happen, but I was a national coach. We were in Italy. We were at Formia, Italy, which is the Italian National Training Center, and I was there with my athletes and the Canadian team. And I was at Sport Canada. So when you're a government employee, you have a green passport.
Okay.
Citizens have blue passports. Well, I decided, I don't know why, but I just decided I was going to go travel on my green passport when I went to Italy. Mm-hmm. And so that designated me as Patrick Reid with the federal government.
Okay.
So anyway, we're down on the track. It's about our 3rd or 4th day, and this dignitary, a hotshot from the Italian Federation, came over and said, Primo Nebbiolo, who was the president of the IIHF at the time, said, he wants to talk to you. He wants to meet with you. I said, he wants to meet with me. What does he know about high jumping? And they said, listen, he's wants tomorrow, they're going to come and pick you up here at the track, and he wants to have a conversation with you. And I said, okay. So our other coaches are going, why you? And I said, shit, I don't know.
Yeah, when he asks you, you kind of just do it.
I said, okay. I figured they'd send a car around and he'd be there and we'd have a conversation. Well, the next day we're at the track, we're training, and a helicopter comes in. And the helicopter lands in the infield, and they said, we're looking for Pat Reid. So I go, shit.
Casually.
Okay. So I go over and get in this helicopter, and we fly up. We're sort of, the Italian Alps are right there, and we go up to this villa on the side of this mountain, and it was his private kind of villa. And so we went in. It was like a 5-course meal, and we're eating, and that's when I found out how Italians eat these multi-course meals.
And consume a bit of wine.
And a lot of wine. But the food comes, and you have fish, and so I ate it. And I noticed everybody else just had a couple of bites, and then came the spaghetti, and then came veal, and then came pasta, and I realized that you don't possibly try to eat all of this stuff. You just taste it. But anyway, that was one thing about the crazy food, the way they prepare it and present it. But then they said, okay, Nebbiolo wants to see us. So I got up and we went in this back room, and he had this table, and he had it laid out of all the international events that were going on in the next 8 years. And he said, it's really important that Canada host the World Cup on this particular year. And I went, yeah, okay. And then he said, and because Germany's going to host this event, and the World Juniors are going to go here, and the World Championships indoors are going to go here. And I thought, what the hell is he talking about? Like all these different high-end events. And he said, so you got to make sure that Canada hosts this World Cup. And I thought, why is he asking me all this stuff? I have no influence whatsoever. And then it kind of hit me. Shit, I traveled on my green government passport, and the head of external affairs is Patrick Reid. Same name. So he thought, I'm assuming he thought I was the Minister for External Affairs and that I could make this happen. So I thought, oh my God, if he finds out I'm just a high jump coach, I could be going back in that helicopter and the door would open and I might fall out and not make it back.
So you were privy to a bit of information there.
Well, I realized that this stuff doesn't happen the way you think it does with bids and, we're all going to vote and it's all this democratic process. He was planning the next 8 years of where events were going to go. And I was right in the middle of it and I shouldn't have been there. And that's why I said, okay, well, we have to talk about this when I get home.
I'll discuss with my people.
I just wanted to get back and get the hell out of there. But anyway, I reported back to Sport Canada what happened, and I had already gotten in shit for having the same name as this guy, because when I joined Sport Canada, I got this invitation in inter-office mail, and it said, you're invited to this reception at the American Embassy. So everybody in the office said, why you? And I said, hell, I don't know. But I got all dressed up and went to the embassy and drank their wine, ate their food, and walked around and picked up whatever gifts they had available. And I thought it was pretty cool. Didn't know anybody. And about a month later, I got an invitation to another embassy. So I went to that party. And same thing, it was a lot of fun. Well, then it was only about the third time that I got a phone call, and it was from the executive assistant of the Minister from External Affairs, and they said, are you getting invitations to Patrick Reid? And I went, yeah, I'm Patrick Reid. What's the problem? And they said, do you realize the Minister of External Affairs' name is Patrick Reid, and you're getting his invitations? I went, shit, I didn't know that. How would I know
I
that?
thought I was just an important person.
Yeah, I thought they were for me. And they went, well, make sure you don't, if you get another one, you send it over here. I thought that was pretty good.
Holy Dinah. Man, these are just mind-boggling stories. And, okay, so to culminate now, you've got all of this life experience. I don't know how anyone could ever tell you how to do anything because you've experienced it. And now you come to Brock, you're in the Niagara region, you're a prof, you've got a couple papers on the go now on, things that are specifically near and dear to your heart, it seems like. And what's that end goal? What are you working towards now?
Well, I'm just enjoying myself, to be quite honest. I really would like to pass on information to students of how to survive in the industry. I've tried to incorporate a couple of things in each of my courses. I tell students for 5 marks, not sure how many marks I can get away with doing this, but for 5 marks, you have to create your own business card, and you have to make exchanges with 5 people in the industry. You have to take the time and go and talk to somebody and that you think can help you in the industry, exchange business cards, and get used to networking. Figure out how you can network. And a lot of the students say, well, how do you network? And so I say, okay, well, if you walked into a room at a conference, you got to have the nerve to walk up to, these little round tables and everybody's got a drink. Well, you got to be able to walk up and introduce yourself and say, hi, my name is whatever. And what's your name? And get into the conversation. And after 5 or 10 minutes, move to another table. Well, some people were mortified to think that they were going to have to talk to a stranger. So I said, well, let's do it in class. So we started every class off. I would say, okay, everybody up, introduce yourself to the person on the right and tell them your decision-making process for choosing Brock University. And then the next one would be, okay, now tell a person on your left something amazing that you did in high school that you're really proud about. And just get people to move around the class and introduce themselves and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think those kinds of little things you can do on the side. Yeah, I can tell them about marketing and sponsorship and ethics and so on. But I think it's the rubber hits the road when you're really actually doing things where students are going to have to talk to people and go to interviews, how to prepare for an interview and how to be comfortable talking to people in the industry. So, yeah, I'm having fun doing that.
It's amazing. Some very wise words from, like I said earlier, and a Canadian icon. And I think that is, for those listening, that's something that certainly you deserve. And I was bringing you on here thinking I might be able to get the Ben Johnson story out of you, let alone now we got more than we bargained for here. So
if you got 2 more minutes, we have one more story.
Yeah, I am all ears. You have as much time as you want. Go for it.
This is the last one, but when I worked at Sport Canada, I wasn't making enough money as a government employee to keep my kids. I was really big on education, and I wanted my kids in a private school, so I sent my daughter to Elmwood Independent School and my son to Ashbury College, and then after grade 8, my daughter moved to Ashbury College. Anyway, prep schools for university, and anyway, I had to find jobs to make money on the side. So I was doing marketing and sponsorship for the National Arts Center. And I was bringing in different acts, and I was finding sponsors and raising money and making 10 and 20% on different projects. Well, when we worked at Corral, one of my contracts, don't have time to get into this one, but I changed the name of the Palladium to Corral Center, $25 million contract over 25 years. Changing the name of the Senators hockey rink to Corral Center. And because of that, we got to know all the players. And it was 1996, and they were just getting into computers. And so Mike Copeland, who is the head of a Corral Corporation, the president who I reported to, he would bring in the players on their days off or nights and weekends and bring in their partners. And we were teaching them about computers and got them software and got them all kinds of products. And so I got to know quite a few of the players. Well, anyway, I'm at the Arts Center, National Arts Center, watching a play. And at the intermission, who do I run into but Alexei Yashin and his parents and his brother. I say, Alexei, and he goes,
not a big deal.
I said, you're into the arts? Like, it kind of surprised me.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, back in Russia, my dad, one of them was an engineer and the other one was a university professor. And they said, we were really into the arts. And so that got me thinking, we should put together the Alexei Yashin Foundation for the Performing Arts. And if you want to donate money a year over 4 years, we could put together this foundation, and I could get Russell Mills, who is the publisher of the Ottawa Citizen, to head it up, and Ruth Foster, who is the vice president of Bell, to be on the committee, and we could have this amazing foundation.
And sorry, you said it was $1 million for over 4 years.
Yeah, it was
correct?
$250,000 a year for 4 years, so it was $1 million donation. And he said, I really like it. We went to the Bolshoi and the Kirov Ballet and the Soviet Union all the time, and and I said, well, the guy I'm working for, John Krypton at the National Arts Center, he's brought the Kira Ballet and the Bolshoi over to Canada and run them across Canada a number of times. So I thought this thing is going to work out fantastic. So Alexei said, I'm really interested in doing it. I just remember it was November 11th, and he said, look, I got to go home now. He said, it's my birthday, and we play, I think it was Pittsburgh that night. And he said, but you go down to the Lion and Bay. My agent, Mark Gandler's there. I'll phone him on my cell as I'm going home, and I'll tell him I want to do this. You give him the details, and away we go. So I said, okay. So what we did, I was waiting for him at the arena at the Corral Center after practice. And he said, look, I don't want to talk about it here because there are all kinds of people standing around the lobby. He said, come out in the parking lot. So we went out in the parking lot, and that's when I explained it to him. Well, when I went away and I put together this proposal, and I wasn't sure if I had it exactly right. So I showed it to Ed Ratushny, who's the Associate Dean of the Law Faculty at University of Ottawa. Okay. He was also a player's agent who looked after Russian athletes. And I got to know that family well because on the World Junior team, his son was on it when we won the World Championships. And then when I ran the women's team, his daughter was on that team, and we won that World Championship. So I knew them. I knew the family well. His wife's a judge in Ontario. So he took the proposal and he made some changes. He tweaked it here and there. And unbeknownst to me, he kept a copy. Being a lawyer, he's smart enough to do that.
Right.
So anyway, I pitched Alexei. Alexei said sure, and so I was pretty happy about that, and I got my 10% off the first payment, and then about a month or so later, I'm at the NAC, and this guy coming down the hall says, "You're Pat Reid," and I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "You don't work here anymore." And I said, "Who the hell are you?" And he said, "I'm Kim McQuaig. I've been hired as the sponsorship director, and I don't have any stringers working for me. So you're gone." And there were two other women that I was working with. He said, "They're gone too. So turn in your keys and your parking pass." And I said, "Oh." So I went to see John Krypton, and he said, "Pat, this is what the board wanted." And so he said, "If you come up with any ideas, keep in touch with me." And I said, "Well, make sure, John, that," I said, the paperwork for the Alexei Yashin Foundation for the Performing Arts has to go to Canadian Revenue Agency to set this thing up. Make sure that happens." Yeah, no problem. So I leave, and I don't hear anything for about 4 months later. During that time, this guy doesn't raise a dime as the marketing guy. They're coming up to their annual meeting. They realized it's year end that he's going to be in trouble because he hasn't raised any money. And so he gets a hold of Gandler and says, "Give me the first $250,000 payment. I need it right away." So Gandler, Russian guy out of New Jersey, "Sure, we agreed to this. Yeah, here's your check." Sends it up to the NAC. So what happened is it's a Crown corporation. So the year end comes and goes, and they get audited because they're a Crown corporation. Right. And they go, "What the hell is this $250,000? And he goes, "Oh, that's for the Alexei Yashin Foundation." They said, "There's no foundation." He'd never submitted the papers to Revenue Canada. So they went, "This is a directed donation. This is illegal." So on the front page of the Citizen, his mother was going to be involved with the foundation. There's a picture of me and his mother talking about an illegal foundation that's created at the National Arts Center. And so they fire him immediately. He's gone.
Indicative of the Senators' organization as a whole, currently even now.
Yeah, it was brutal. So they fire McQuaig, and they shred all of the files, and then they play Dum Dum the Dancing Bear. They say, "We don't know, we don't know what the Alexei Yashin Foundation was all about. Go talk to Pat Reid. He created it." So they came to me, and I said, I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know they didn't put the paperwork in. So everybody's mad as hell about this, particularly Alexei, who didn't deserve the criticism that he got.
Yeah.
And he just said, "You're making me sound like I'm the crook. I'm the guy that's giving the money."
Yeah.
He didn't know that Gandler hadn't submitted any of the paperwork. So fortunately for me, about 2 weeks later, Roy McGregor, who writes for the Globe and Mail and the National Post, plays old-timer hockey, and he and Ed are on the same line, Ed Ratushny. So Roy says, "What do you make of this about Pat Reid and Alexei Yashin?" He goes, "That's not the Pat Reid I know." And I can't figure this out. And Ed goes, I know the whole story. I have his proposal. I kept a copy of it. So Roy said, well, can I see it? So fortunately for me, but it was too late. It was like a month later. He wrote the whole proposal in the National Post on a page and a half, explained the whole thing.
Wow.
And but, you know, the way social media is and so on, the damage was done, and they didn't want Alexei, and Rod Brydon didn't want to pay him his salary, so they made him out as this greedy Russian, and so they dumped him. They traded him to the Islanders. The Islanders realized his value. They gave him a contract for $90 million for 9 years, which was nuts.
Yeah.
And that was the last we heard of Alexei Ashen.
Man, so $1 million foundation just down
Fell
the
apart.
drain because of...
He paid only the one payment, and the whole thing died after that.
What a shame.
Wasn't that a big trade too? The Ashen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was a top scorer. That's why he asked for his contract to be renegotiated.
Yeah.
Because he led in goals, assists, and points, and playing time, and block shots, and everything. He was the whole team.
In Ottawa.
Yeah, and they and Brydon didn't want to go to arbitration about his contract because Paul Correa had done the same thing when he was with the Ducks. He said, I had a hell of a year, and his team said, yeah, we'll go to arbitration, and yeah, you should get more money. So Brydon had no money, but he thought, oh man, if we go to arbitration, they're going to give this guy all kinds of money.
Yeah.
Indicative of how much the Islanders gave him.
Right.
So he just suspended him and started this whole PR thing about the guy's a greedy Russian and a crook and everything else, and it was really too bad.
Well, for those who were intelligent enough to take the time to listen to this conversation, I don't know if we've had someone who's been able to draw on this much life experience, this much insight. Pat, I cannot thank you enough for the amount you've contributed to the Athletes Podcast and how much it's going to grow after this episode. My jaw's still on the floor. Any closing words? I just really appreciate you coming on, taking the time out of your day. I know you got to go get a nice cup of Joe with the wife because she deserves time with you too.
Yeah, I guess my closing comments is dream big, and don't take no for an answer. And you never look at barriers; you only look at opportunities. And I think that, I think everybody can accomplish great things. You just have to, work at it and stay positive. Wish you all the best too.
What a way to end it! Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Pat, again. I really appreciate it.